Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's November 10th, 2025. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
I am living the dream, Eric. How about you? What's going on in the Kep family?
Doing great. It's the Marine Corps birthday today. So I hope you're ready to celebrate.
Always born ready to celebrate the Marines. What are you all doing? Given 2 Marines in the family, have you indoctrinated the kids?
That's right. My wife is a former Marine as well. Yeah, we'll always have a cake cutting ceremony in our household. She's the youngest Marine, and then I'm the oldest Marine. Got my sword out yesterday. But yeah, it's good exposure for the kids. Like a lot of people will transition from Halloween and they'll be like, oh yeah, it's time for Thanksgiving. And we're like, nope. You've got the Marine Corps birthday, you've got Veterans Day, and then you've got Thanksgiving. So you need to slow it down a little bit before you jump straight to Christmas.
I like it. I think your kids are getting this rich experience. It's good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, it'll be funny when they get older, though, or they like start dating and they'll be like, wait, you guys don't celebrate the Marine Corps birthday? And their significant other will be like, wait, what? What are you talking about?
So happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Yeah, thanks. When it's the week of my actual birthday, I dread that anyone will find out. And like it adds extra anxiety that somebody will wish me a happy birthday. But November 10th, man, I'll shout it from the rooftops. Celebrate all the Marines, past and present.
Past and present. When I was leaving the government, I just remembered this. A friend of mine was the archivist of the United States, and he gave us a backstage tour to the treasure vaults of the archives. And
cool.
I think one of the things he showed us was the original Declaration of the Formation of the Marine Corps. I think that's right. When was it, 1775?
That's right. This is the 250th birthday.
Beats the U.S. by a year. I love it. There's so many good things. Anyway, way to go.
Hoorah, Semper Fidelis. We'll celebrate through the rest of the show, but let's go ahead and get to some headlines.
All right, I love it.
This week, we'll recap election news from around the country and also discuss the budget that came out through the Senate. Kazakh uranium, in addition to the Abraham Accords and a White House visit by a former al-Qaeda member. We'll discuss some U.S. partnerships, new and old. Strategic autonomy versus interoperability. Is Europe's Space Act about safety or shutting out U.S. partners? And finally, AI jitters meet an EU pause. Bubble or breather? All right, so we'll start this week recapping a little bit of election news. Last week, we recorded on Tuesday and encouraged everyone to get out to vote. And then I released the episode at like 6 o'clock. So, locations were closed in most spots, but glad many of you got out to vote. Throughout the country, we saw generally progressive-leaning candidates win. So Mondami winning the mayoral race in New York City, Spamberger in Virginia for governor, Mickey Sherrill in New Jersey, and also Prop 50 passing in California, which was the proposition to hold a temporary redistricting in response to some of the gerrymandering in Texas earlier this year. So what were some of your reactions on the election news around the country?
You and I had talked about it, but we had been a little bit neutral in terms of predicting the outcome. We presaged each one of these, but I'm not sure that we really said that they would all come to pass. And I think they did in pretty overwhelming fashion. And this is something they were calling a minute after the polls closed rather than taking something longer than that. So that's one. I think it's hard to argue. And I think even the president and the Republicans, for the most part, except for Mike Johnson, who's never as up to date as he ought to be when someone asks him, what do you think about it? He's like, oh, I don't know. I haven't looked at them. But I think this is pretty clear. I think it's certainly sentiment of the country. Mondami will be interested to see how he actually delivers on the promise that got him elected. Mondami is just interesting in terms of where the country is. And to the discussion you and I have is, can you actually pull off this kind of agenda? I like that he's starting with childcare. Boy, if you were to find a way to provide some universal childcare in the city of New York, that is something that all parents struggle with, particularly post-COVID. Spamberger and Sherrill, I know both of them. I've known them through the legislature and oversight committees. I like people with a national security background coming into local politics. I think that's terrific. It's why we do this podcast, right? Now they bring that perspective back home to their states, not just representing it in the legislature. I also think that it's two more governors that are activists in their views, and they join Newsom and Pritzker and Shapiro and some others. And now you see the governors as an increasing force that are pushing back or I'm going to say countering what seems to be the offloading of federal responsibilities by the Trump administration without tension on the other side of it, what it means to real women and men in daily living. So I think now you have kind of a growing activist governor coalition that is pretty interesting to see. And then Prop 50 is hard to argue, in terms of how Newsom was able to do a little bit of turning the tables on what had been just a straight power move of redistricting, and he put it up to the votes. I think it's clear what his messaging, that there's some dissatisfaction, that dissatisfaction turns into action. And I think it's going to be hard for the current administration to not see it as a harbinger of 2026.
26. I think it's not insignificant, right? It's a microcosm. There's
Yeah.
only 2 gubernatorial races, a mayor.
I think it's small, but I do think the Democrats have got to prove that they are more than about words and they're more than about finger wagging. And they've got to address the real concerns of real humans. To me, that has been the wave that the Trump administration has ridden, which is this dissatisfaction of real people that for all the things being said and money being spent, their lives still aren't there. Now, the tables have flipped a little bit, whether you could say that these were referendums on some of the Trump administration policies. But I think it's more, if you don't see, even out of these few races, some movement toward real action that actually delivers real benefit, then I think you could see the energy dissipate. I think it was a moment. I don't think anyone should over-rotate on it, but I do think it was a moment, and it was pretty clear in
Right.
each of those.
Yep. Well, let's talk about the folks who are in the legislature right
Yeah.
now. And the Senate passed a proposal to fund the government until January 30th. However, it still needs to get through the House and then go over to the president to sign. So we expect another couple days before it all gets finalized, if approved at all. The bill would prohibit federal agencies from firing employees until January 30th. And also, the big compromise was call for a future vote on extending the Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies. Sue, what do you think about this?
I think the legislators had to do something.
Yeah.
We've talked about it each time. No matter what you think about the policy tussle going on, the one that the talking heads like to talk about, these are real humans that have missed 2 paychecks. And I don't think there is an elected official who could imagine going into Thanksgiving week with the government still closed, with the prospect of a 4th paycheck missing. So to me, this feels like finally a moment where the reality of elected officialdom just came to the forefront. As we talked about, had the GOP not recognized that they were being hurt and increasing the blame, they wouldn't have even gone this far. The Democrats have recognized that even though I think they still are massively distrustful, that all they got was a promise for a future vote. I think a vote in December on
Next month, within a month. Yep.
Yeah, they're probably holding their breath or their nose or something with that agreement. But again, the human toll was just one that I don't think any elected official could bear. And they have effectively made it a single issue vote when that comes around. And so they got pressure and leverage, even if they didn't get the outcome assured. And you also have some other bills agreeing to be passed. So you're going to extend the CR, but you're also going to get a couple of other bills passed. So I think they had to. You know what they didn't have to do, Eric?
What's that?
If they had done their jobs, they didn't have to put anyone in this role, and they didn't have to have nearly 40 days of shutdown. Let's see if they can start legislating better. Maybe there's just a whole bunch of issues they can take on.
Yeah, I like it being a standalone issue that they'll vote on, and then you'll get record of that and get discussion on that instead of having it all mumbled up together with the budget. But I am also skeptical that they have a couple of weeks because they don't have the votes to get it passed now and make these Affordable Care Act subsidies permanent. There's talk of turning them into tax credits and all sorts of stuff, but we'll see what happens. Good that the government shutdown has an end in sight, though. Let's talk about the greatest story in the land. It's the 10th anniversary of the C5+1, the U.S. and Central Asia diplomatic platform created in 2015 of the U.S. plus Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. It was set up to coordinate an economic, energy, minerals, and security cooperation. President Trump last week hosted the 5 Central Asian leaders at the White House, touting billions in agreements and reports of a push to reduce dependence on China for rare earths, along with new U.S. Central Asia business initiatives. Kazakhstan also moved to join the Abraham Accords, which the White House cast as renewed regional momentum. They're the largest landlocked country on Earth, and maybe more importantly, they are the world's top uranium producer. Before I get your reaction, Sue, is there any worse acronym in diplomacy or around the world than C5+1?
No, unless it's JADC2.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty bad one.
No, it's a terrible acronym. On the other hand, it's probably better than the colloquial, the STANs, which became popular after with the dissolution of the former Soviet Unions. But no, it's a terrible acronym. I am in favor of more alliances, particularly around trade. When you have something like rare earths that are naturally occurring and those regions have them, it gives standing to be able to participate with some heft in an economic world that is otherwise dominated by big powers. In general, I like what it's focused on. I like that the U.S. is playing in it, given that they do have things that are benefit to us. And by the U.S. being involved, it does give free and open societies some regional presence in an area that has tendencies to not be as free and open just historically. I also like the move of Kazakhstan to join the Abraham Accords. In general, to have regions selfish governing with a foundation of real power, and that is the resources over which they have domain. And I like the U.S. having relationships with them because not only is it good for us economically on this front, but again, it keeps the U.S. as a global leader in how we do things. So, do I think it's the be all and end all? Will everything happen? But I don't mind this, and I think it's in the direction of some goodness. How about you?
No, I think so too, especially with being the world's largest uranium producer. We talked about last week, maybe upcycling or repurposing some old uranium and fuel for nuclear reactors. But I think good folks to have in our corner and have alignments with. And I was surprised that they were joining the Abraham Accord, but good news there. And then self-ish governing, to your
Right.
point. Wanted to talk a little bit about how Reuters is reporting that we're going to be increasing our military presence in Syria by putting troops at an air base in Damascus, the capital of Syria. So it's tied to an Israel-Syria security tract and leads to lasting U.S. regional presence, which personally I am a fan of, having completely left Iraq in 2011 to only be back there 3 years later because we didn't have a standing presence regardless of the size of the footprint. I think was a significant oversight. But along those same lines, the Syrian president is coming to meet at the White House. This is the first time in the country's independence in 1946 that the leader of Syria has come to the White House. Al-Shara was removed from the global terrorist list on Friday, and State Department spokespeople said that his government has been meeting U.S. demands, including working to find missing Americans and to eliminate any remaining chemical weapons. But Sue, this dude joined al-Qaeda about 20 years ago. We arrested him in Iraq in 2005. He spent 6 years in American and Iraqi prisons before his release in 2011. Then he was an affiliate of al-Qaeda in Syria, designated by the U.S. as a terrorist again in 2013. But in 2016, he renounced his allegiance to al-Qaeda and rebranded as a new organization to try to keep the U.S. and Russians from targeting his group. His resistance force ended up liberating Damascus, winning the Syrian civil war, and now he is the recognized president.
So, what do you make of all this? You will be
Yeah.
shocked, as will our listeners, that I have three thoughts on this. So, number one is this is a world where economic considerations are more dominant than just straight political military considerations. And economic considerations tend to be more situational. So I'll put the two of them together and say that having relationships with a newly formed Syria in a region that is still contentious and where we are interested in doing development makes sense. It makes sense economically because of all the things we're trying to do in that region. It makes some sense politically because the region is unsettled and you're trying to get more friends than not. And it makes sense because in this world with this administration, they're more willing to overlook minor things like someone's past in order to get what they want today. One, I think it's a sign of the times. Two, I think that the world is still disrupted. And so the U.S. having strength in all its relationships with what I'm going to call undecided nation states is important. And then three, we haven't talked about Ukraine and it hasn't been at the top of the news. But let's not forget that when we talked about that, Putin's ambitions to redraw lines back to where they were, the U.S. being involved in whether it's Syria or Kazakhstan or the C5, I think is an important play for stability as much as it is for economic development. Putting a presence in Syria, when did the embassy close? 2012?
That sounds right. Yeah, the civil war started in 2011.
Yeah, so Damascus has always been an important place for us to be. So watch for this first foray into presence from a trading stability play into something that turns over time into something more permanent in terms of a diplomatic relationship. I don't like the idea of someone who is shifting sides situationally from al-Qaeda to now visiting the White House. What I do like is the notion that the U.S. is a participant in global affairs. This and the Kazakhstan move are both examples of us playing a role that I think the world needs the U.S. to play.
Yeah. I don't like it, but I get it. He's the leader of that country right now. I'm not going to be naive and think that the Iraqi prison system rehabilitated him and made him a
Yeah.
good guy. Syria is very important for regional stability.
So again, harkening back to 2012, you had Russia with a permanent presence in Syria. So this is a global stability play as well. I've been pretty clear on my worries about, do we understand the nature of all the deals that are being cut? I don't know that we do, and I'd like to see more transparency on that front. But to our thesis about national and economic security or local more than anything, just remind that when we have good economic relationships with foreign partners, those do tend to ripple effect to be manifested locally. So I also like the idea of the U.S. defining the kind of relationship that we have, and I think that makes it easier for localities to decide whether taking foreign investment is a good thing or not. It's better when the U.S. sets up the standard at the national level, and then I think it ripples more easily. Not saying that Syria is going to be a donor of resources locally. I'm just saying that there are lots of effects when we participate nationally in economic development.
Maybe. Global economy.
Global economy, which is
Yeah.
funny because this administration has been, in shorthand terms, rails against globalism. But you and I have talked about is decoupling from the global environment is not a good thing for U.S. leadership or for the world. I don't mind this. I think both our first two stories do show that we are still being aggressive internationally. The first disproportionately economically. The second one is more stability that hopefully then leads to both stability and security.
Yep. Made in Damascus.
Yep. Ha,
So, one more fun fact about Kazakhstan. The
yeah.
Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan launched both Sputnik in 1957 and Yuri Gagarin 1961, the
Well
first
done.
satellite and first human in space.
Since both those were when the Soviet Union was still a thing, and since Putin seems to be still interested in recapturing his view of the right history, I will say that when we participate and open up some of these had been contentious regions, they do tend to come back into play if we do things, particularly against Russia. Baikonur was launching some commercial space, US commercial space launches, and when Russia invaded Ukraine, we put sanctions on, and Baikonur could no longer be used by US companies to launch things. So, one, I love the history. Thanks for playing to my space girl background. But it does make a point about it is a good thing, but you do also assume some risk because I don't think the world is settled in terms of who aligns with whom when conflict comes. So,
Sure.
the more you
Yeah.
play, the more you have risk. Leaders of companies pay attention to that.
Yeah. Tell Putin you'll never get this.
Ha!
Speaking of space, the State Department blasted the EU's draft Space Act as discriminatory, warning it would raise non tariff barriers on U.S. space firms and undercut the NATO and US EU cooperation across essentials like space weather, remote sensing, debris mitigation, comms, and flight safety. The U.S. points to provisions that privilege EU only launch options and add stricter environmental and cyber requirements than the U.S. rules, and argue this threatens interoperability and shared operations that our allies rely on. Brussels frames the laws about safety, resilience, sustainability, and part of a broader push for European strategic autonomy. We've advocated before about infrastructure in space and recognizing as a form of infrastructure. So, what are your reactions to this legislation they've proposed and also the U.S.'s response?
Well, I think it does certainly, as it did with the EU data policy, says that the European Union and Europe in general is trying to have their own regional strength, not just be dependent on US markets, US provision, or US government in order to be assured, in this case, access to space. But it's not limited to space. We've seen it in the data area as well. Yeah, the top line, what it represents is a move to pesky sovereignty. And that
Mhm.
is, we'll set the rules. And by coming up with these policies at the EU level, they're saying we do have strength in our organization, not just individually. To me, the first takeaway is Europe is trying to be a force with an opinion, with a standard that both unifies their nations but also sets up some independence from the United States and, equally from China or others who are historically the greater providers of these services. What they've put in this policy are things that the US has talked about as more space activity has come out of the realm of just government-based activities, and you have more commercial entities that can throw stuff up into space. This debris mitigation, what I call good citizenship in space, has been an issue for the United States. We've talked about it. Debris management, much more attention to space as being critical infrastructure and therefore cyber protections being important to it. And then environmental impact. They are things the U.S. has talked about. For the U.S. to somehow be horrified that this is coming about, it's all issues that we've talked about. When the government alone isn't the provider of services, how do you make services that are being offered adhere to STEM standard? Then this policy is a way to do that for Europe. We can't be too horrified at the idea of standards when it's in areas that we've talked about needing to have advanced. Here, we just hadn't settled on how to do it. And then, because I always do things in threes, the third is I do think there are likely to be, if it is, when is it set to go into effect? 2030? Right? So
I'll check.
this is just a draft policy.
Hmm.
But I do see that big companies will always have an easier time meeting standards because their resources are bigger, and smaller companies could be challenged more to meet any new set of standards because, again, their financial underpinning isn't so broad. Usually they're the ones that are scrambling to put new capability out, not necessarily go through all the bureaucratic hurdles. And so from a US company perspective,
Mhm.
given how much of our space development is not just in the hands of the SpaceXs and the AOLs, but it's with a lot of smaller companies, I think you could see a company impact if these are put into place. And that's a great reason for Commerce to get involved. My last comment is just there's one thing that the US government has historically hated, and that is standards. Even though it has suffered when another nation state is the one setting those standards like China. So we don't much like standards, and we really don't like it when someone else is running the risk of setting them. So the US reaction to this is a little bit expected. But I think if you think about those three areas, it makes a little sense. It doesn't seem to be something that it is being done to make our life difficult. On the other hand, it could have impact if it's ratified on some of the smaller entrants into the space game. But mostly
Yeah,
it's an EU play for the EU.
the article mentions that there are 70 responding companies that have active or potential future commercial interests in the
Right.
EU market. And especially since we've talked before about the US government's not buying, so many of these commercial companies are looking internationally to sell some of their products. Are these the standards that they're already internally designing for and building to, or is this going to have to be a pivot for many of those companies?
I think it's just more cost, right, in order to account for it. Some of the ideas on debris management is if you put up something in space, you either have to pay additionally for the launch for some centralized service to be able to do the space tracking management, or you also have to be responsible for the deorbiting of your asset. So a lot of these, what it means is more than being onerous, it's additional costs, and you worry about that when you have a nascent company. I also think for US businesses, what it means is that Europe is going to say, no, 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 we're Europe. And so, yes, those companies are interested in participating with international players who now see that space is a great place to affect security, whether that is national security or economic security. But you're going to have to not only think about how you meet regulations, but how, as a US company, you address the salability and attractiveness of a US product
Hmm.
when these other countries turn to advance their own. I think you can see where it comes from. It isn't an anti-play, but because of how active we want to be, it will be an impactful play if it comes to pass.
Sounds like some good proposals, but they'll tell me what to do.
Yeah. Wait, I think I just talked for 11 minutes and you said it perfectly.
Happy to summarize.
Yeah, there you go. We're a team.
From more regulation to less regulation in the realm of AI, the European Commission is preparing a simplification package that would pause or water down parts of their AI Act that after intense pushback from big tech and the US government. Even as the law formally entered into force in 2024, Brussels again is weighing a 1 year grace period for firms breaching the highest risk provisions and a delay of fines to August of 2027, arguing companies need time to adapt. Politically, the move reflects fears of provoking the White House, trade retaliation, Ukraine support packages, etc., and a broader bid to keep Europe competitive with the US and China. For national security, the stakes are transatlantic, fragmented rules constrain intelligence and tech cooperation. They talk about some of this as being extraterritorial, not one size fits all. The EU was one of the first to get out there and enforce some policies, and now kind of taking a step back and applying either a little grace or walking these back entirely. What do you think?
Everything that we said in the last section applies to this one. Data is even harder. AI is harder still because we have worked more on the technology, not unconstrained, but more on the capability. The market forces have driven the capability and I'll say the word regulatory, the regulatory forces have struggled to figure out what is the standard we keep. And so this falls squarely in the category of we haven't even decided what our own standards are entirely, even though I laud the administration continuing to put
Mhm.
out AI policy that hasn't turned into real constraints. Even as companies themselves are looking, how do you constrain AI to make sure that it's understandable so that you can rely on it? We are more in the free for all, moving forward with the plus side rather than the control. And now you have the EU stepping in. And so I
Yeah.
think it just fits into that category of it will have a retarding effect on advancement or at least revenues if this is the first place where US companies have to be able to demonstrate performance against any standard, much less these. So I think it fits into that larger category of yay standards, boo standards. But I also think that it comes at the time where globally people are coming to the realization that you introduced that says, wait a minute, what are these company valuations based on? Is there going to be a bursting AI bubble? There are signs on the forefront. This comes at exactly the time that there are even bigger concerns whether AI in actuality is as ready to be implemented for good as the promise of the capability excites us. It's two
Mhm.
tensions that are coming crashing into one another that are not good for the market, though maybe be good for the technology. And let's just remember that a lot of the concerns when we think about AI being not ready to do all the things that the science fiction books, large language model and kind of the generative AI does have limitations right now, but there are a whole lot of other areas in AI, agentic AI, the AI that powers electric cars, that is still advancing. So one of the things that I think will be teased out if there is market disruption, I think what you'll do is you'll see AI not being viewed as a homogeneous blob, but you'll see the ones that are risk ready and risk intolerant, and we'll start to see the market divide on that front.
Yeah, that's a great point. We have used this broad term AI for the past couple years to describe everything from an algorithm to a large language model to agentic to generative. And they're all very different things. And we just use it rather generically. So I wonder if those will break up over time
Yeah.
into almost subsets. And they should, right? Because they all do different things and have different roles.
I'm still really bullish on AI in general. Eric, you use it quite a bit. You've got me using it. I think it's a great helper technology. I still think it is part of the future, but I think what more users need to really embrace is what is their risk tolerance and what is the risk readiness of the various technologies. So I am bullish strategically, tactically worried about a bursting bubble.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement in the markets, particularly around the capital expenditure or CapEx that many of these big companies, also known as hyperscalers, are spending on data centers, manufacturing, et cetera. But then the cause for concern and what we mentioned last episode was some of the circular financing, right? OpenAI invests in one of the chip companies. The chip company then turns around and invests in OpenAI. And it's not just OpenAI, it's all across the board. They sit on each other's boards. And so there's just this little bit of extra coziness that could make an investor feel uncomfortable, not to mention the insane valuations, right? We talked about NVIDIA moving from $4 trillion to a $5 trillion company in a matter of a couple months. So how much do these AI valuation jitters worry you, Sue?
I think there's going to be a bursting bubble. I don't know what the surface tension is. In other words, is it going to be explosive or a deflation? But I think it's probably right. You and I talk all the time about, oh, you wanted to use it. If the market can't stand up to this scrutiny, pressure, questioning, discontent, if it can't step up to all those things, then it's the market saying, yes, we know that we have some distance yet to travel in terms of a fully robust capability that is ready to be employed. So since markets tend to over time go up since this technology is here, yeah, I think there might be a little bit of a bursting bubble, and I don't think that's a bad thing, and it can be withstood. Now, if you've overcommitted to any particular stock, you could be disappointed, but I think that this technology is certainly here to stay. A couple things that we have talked about that we might want to link here is let's watch what in the national security defense industry, what the players like Palantir and Anduril and Anthropic, when it comes time to deliver on the contracts that they've won, do they perform? I think we can watch that space a little bit. And the second thing is we talk a lot about innovation and the importance of local action. We will press this issue more, but I'm increasingly convinced that the federal government is not the place where you can really expect to see innovation just because it's so large and because it has so many responsibilities on it that it is hard to make changes. Man, I think where you could see some real explosive advances in the technology and the uses at the local level when localities decide to huddle together for warmth, like California, Oregon, and Washington as a new kind of healthcare coalition. I would love it if some of the companies with the new information technologies reached out to this consortia and say, let's not cobble together what you already have. Let's do it entirely in a different way. And when those sorts of things start happening, you see the development of, I'll call the safety standards that go with it. I think we've talked a minute about in 2013 when some really brilliant people at the CIA recognized that the cloud was important, and they reached out and ran a competition and went into partnership with AOL and Amazon Web Services well before anyone else was really thinking about it on a corporate scale. And what happened when that contract was let is both sides benefited from something that they thought might be beneficial to knowing how they had to do the real work to both take advantage of what cloud technologies allowed mission-wise. That's what the government got from it. And what Amazon got was, oh, these security requirements are real. So I look forward to the time where you get massive use of some of AI capabilities and you really put it through its paces, and that's where you'll see it become much more secure and safe than just when it's a capability being offered that might make a difference.
Yeah, and the consortium lends to a lot of, you only got to get in once, and that's some great traction. You get that government stamp of approval, even if it's a state and local
Right.
approval. And then the guys next door be like, well, hey, I want that. That's a good idea. Can you modify that to work in these 3 states or this couple states or in
Right.
my state?
Yeah, so the advantage is that the state and local, the consortiums are still big and have the governmental kind of, oh, you have to do it right. People have to be able to count on it. But state and local is smaller, where you can imagine doing a revolutionary thing much more than you can imagine doing a revolutionary thing at the federal level.
And then scale it.
Yep, so new idea.
Since you've been talking about this for a minute, what do you remember about the dot-com bubble busting back in 1999? How much of that had a national security impact? Or do you remember any anecdotes of when the dot-com bubble burst and how that impacted you all in the intelligence community?
I think it was still so new that the chilling effect that it had was on the establishments. It was like, see, we said that you couldn't count on these new technologies. That was right at the time. If you remember, 1996 is really the first publicly available browser. I had just started an office called Advanced Analytic Tools at the CIA. And what we found was we knew what we wanted the tools to be, but they weren't quite ready, and we didn't have the infrastructure. But there was a lot of antibodies within the governmental systems, as there is with any established organization, against new. And when the bubble hit, it was like, see, you shouldn't be counting on this. So my worry is that you have this bubble right now, right at the moment where data is the new oil, right at the moment where if the bubble bursts, yes, you will have the opportunity to make those technologies more robust and more resilient, because that's what always happens when somebody says, I'm not sure this is ready for prime time, it becomes better. But the much more worrisome piece is that you'll get organizational resistance to it, and the nattering nabobs of negativism will come out and say, I told you so. But I don't think there's anything stopping this over time. This is my jam. Take circumstance and use it. I don't know that a bubble bursting in the market would be devastating if the people who know they need to use it would double down and actually give a damn about whether it's performant, not just on its potential.
Yeah, I think the other big difference here is this time it's a race. I don't know that in 1999 we were
Yeah.
racing to develop the internet with China, right?
Yeah. We were so far ahead, and it still was new. Now we have whole businesses counting on it being good enough. The winners are gonna be the ones that understand more than just the hype, but understand which technologies are risk ready and which ones are still in the offing.
All right. What are you watching moving into next week?
So I'm still watching the Supreme Court and what they do on tariffs, although I think you see some signs that either the Trump administration sees the writing on the wall and is now going out with the idea that tariffs were never about the money, they were about the leverage. That might be just an argument to say, well, if we lose it, what we lost was leverage, but not, tens of trillions of dollars, maybe. But I think it matters right up until the point that the Congress decides that it does have Republican control, and if they wanted to institute the exact same tariffs that we have, they probably could do that legislatively and make it all good. I also was interested in Pete Hegseth's conversations about acquisitions and speeding it up and not doing the old-fashioned way, a mantra that you and I have talked about. It was a little bit of Secretary of the Army Driscoll's message at AUSA is we need to be faster. You and I have long known that it needs to be faster. Although there was something about how Secretary Hegseth said it that made me remember the old adage, that is, if you want it bad, you tend to get it that way. There are reasons that some of the acquisition rules are in place in terms of reliability and performance, but I thought they were interesting comments. I don't think they're wrong. The question is, can you deliver performance if you just say, I'm not going to do the checks and balances I understand? And it's not obvious that they've come up with new ways to assure that what's being offered is performance. And that's always the rub, right? The reason why it's so slow is because we came up with all these regulations layered on top of one another because of every little thing that went wrong. Usually the way you affect real change is by coming up with a new way to assure the outcome you want, but do so differently. So I think that's an interesting one to watch and see how much pushback you get from the people who have historically delivered, who now seem to have become the villain, and it looks like the department is gonna put their thumb on the scale for some of the new entrants, when what they should do is saying, "Here is the time frame I need it delivered in, free and open competition of who can
Yeah.
get there faster."
Yep. Compete it.
Yeah, how about you? What are you looking at?
So there are a couple of oversight hearings last week, one on Venezuela. And so happy to see that the legislature's doing a little bit of oversight. I think the reaction coming out of at least the Senate committee was positive. They agreed that it is not legal to strike in the country of Venezuela, but yes, legal to strike in international waters. That's as far as the justification goes right now. Positive movement from the legislature, and hopefully they keep in that direction and getting us some more transparency on
Yep.
stuff like that.
Yep.
Also, this is more of a long time horizon type one, but Governor-elect Spanberger of Virginia had some discussions over the weekend on Face the Nation about the energy demands in Virginia and her plan to help. Virginia's got more data centers than I think any other state, or they've got quite a few data centers there, and just her plan moving forward, how they implement some of this energy infrastructure and costs between the big spenders in terms of the data centers and the hyperscalers and the citizens, how we're paying for electricity. So something to watch there.
Yeah, Virginia is a big, diverse state with a lot of national security data needs. I loved seeing that. And it's something that around which we need innovation and is in her control. So I like it.
Yep. All right.
Good pull.
Well, that's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people. And happy Marine Corps birthday.
We're so glad you join us each week. Remember, we're here for you. There's a link in the show notes where you can provide feedback or suggest topics for the next time. We are always open, but neatly enough, the world keeps turning in a way that we have new things to talk about. So join us next week and see what's on our minds. And just remember to, when you go out, go forth, do good, and be kind to one another.